You know that smell of rain on hot pavement? Mix that with the smell of shattered dreams. That's all that was left of my family's café. 3 generations of early mornings, whispered secrets over steaming mugs, and the comforting scent of coffee beans, all of it, gone. Reduced to a pile of splintered wood and broken porcelain. And it was all his fault. Julian Carter. His name was plastered all over the new luxury tower that had just erased my entire life. A sleek, heartless monolith of glass and steel casting a shadow over the rubble of my past. I swore I'd make him pay. I just never imagined my revenge would start on my hands and knees, scrubbing the floors of his penthouse. Before we get into how I ended up there, if you could take a second, please do like this video and subscribe to this channel for more stories. It helps more than you know. Thank you. Okay, now let's get back to it. They called it urban renewal. They had these glossy brochures with smiling, soulless people promising a brighter future for the neighborhood. My neighborhood. The one my grandfather helped build. Our café, the Daily Grind, wasn't just a business, it was our community's living room. It's where Mrs. Parker came for her morning scone after her husband passed, where college students fueled their all-nighters, where my parents had their first date. It was my inheritance, not of money, but of memories and purpose. I fought. Man, did I fight. I filed petitions, I went to every town hall meeting, I even stood in front of the bulldozers until my voice was raw and my body ached with a fatigue that went straight to my bones. But you can't fight a force of nature, and Julian Carter was a hurricane in a $1,000 suit. His lawyers were sharks, and his money was a tidal wave that swept away everything in its path. The day they tore it down, I just stood across the street, the eviction notice crumpled in my fist. A cold, hard knot of fury was solidifying in my chest. I watched the wrecking ball swing, and every impact felt like a physical blow. The sign my dad had carved by hand just splintered. The bay window where I did my homework as a kid shattered into a million pieces. With every crash, a piece of me broke, too. The anger was so pure, so potent, it was the only thing holding me together. I hated Julian Carter with every fiber of my being. I hated his name, his face on the cover of magazines, and the careless way he had dismantled my world without a second thought. The next few weeks were a blur of closing accounts, selling off what little equipment was salvageable, and watching my savings dwindle to basically nothing. The insurance payout was a joke, all tangled up in legal clauses about eminent domain. My parents, bless their hearts, tried to be strong for me, but I could see the light dimming in their eyes. The café was their legacy, and watching it die had aged them a decade. I was 24, holding a business degree I'd planned to use to expand the café, and now I was staring at a stack of bills I had no way to pay. Desperation is a bitter pill to swallow. It makes you do things you swore you never would. It led me to this high-end domestic staffing agency, the kind that serves the city's elite. The woman at the desk, pristine and polished, looked at my resume with this thinly veiled pity. "There's an opening for a cleaner in one of the new Carter Tower penthouses," she said, her voice crisp. "It pays exceptionally well. The owner is particular." The name hit me like a slap in the face. Carter. Of course. The irony was so cruel it was almost funny. Working in the very building that had replaced my life. But the pay she quoted was more than I could make in 3 months at any other job. It was survival. It was a lifeline when I was drowning. But as I walked towards the tower for the interview, a different thought started to form, twisting that knot of fury in my gut into a sharp, pointed weapon. What if this wasn't surrendering? What if it was an opportunity? A way to get close to him. To see the man behind the empire. To find a weakness. To figure out how to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. I could walk away, my pride intact but my future uncertain. Or I could walk in, swallow that pride, and learn his secrets. I could find a way to burn his world down just like he did mine. My reflection in the gleaming lobby doors showed a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes were hard, her jaw was set. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed down my simple black dress, and walked inside. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a mission. The interview wasn't with him, obviously. It was with a severe-looking woman named Mrs. Davenport, his household manager. She walked me through a penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a modern art museum, sterile, silent, and suffocatingly perfect. All white marble, black leather, and glass walls that gave you a godlike view of the city. From up here, the rubble of my old life was just an insignificant speck. Mrs. Davenport handed me a list of duties and rules that was 3 pages long, single-spaced. No personal calls. No touching personal items. No speaking to Mr. Carter unless spoken to. He preferred, she said, for the staff to be invisible. He values his privacy above all else, she finished, her eyes scanning me for any sign of weakness. I understand completely, I said, my voice not betraying any of the turmoil inside me. I'm very good at being invisible. I got the job. My first day was the next Monday. As I rode that silent, private elevator up to the top floor, the plan felt both insane and ingenious. I, Clara Evans, was about to become a ghost in the machine that had crushed me. A maid to the man I had sworn to destroy. That first week was fueled by a cold, silent rage. My rage, and his cold, silent existence. Julian Carter was more of a ghost than a man. He left before I got there in the morning and came back long after I was gone. The only proof he even lived there was a perfectly made bed that needed remaking, a single coffee cup in the sink, and the faint, expensive scent of sandalwood and something else, something crisp and clean, like mountain air. My duties were simple and repetitive. I cleaned floors so polished you could see your own miserable reflection in them. I dusted surfaces that were already spotless. I organized a wardrobe of designer suits, all in shades of black, gray, and navy. It was a lonely, soulless existence, scrubbing away any trace of human life from a home that had no warmth to begin with. I channeled my hate into my work. I scrubbed his marble floors with a fury that left my muscles screaming. I polished his chrome fixtures until they gleamed with an almost aggressive shine. Every act of cleaning was an act of defiance. Asterisk, you see this smudge? This is the life you erased. And I'm wiping it away, just like you did, asterisk. In my head, I rehearsed 100 different ways I'd confront him. I'd throw a bucket of dirty water on his pristine white suit. I'd tell him exactly who I was and watch his face for a flicker of recognition, of guilt. But I knew that would just get me fired. My revenge had to be smarter. Slower. I had to become part of the furniture, trusted and overlooked. So I stayed invisible, just like she told me to. My first real interaction with him happened at the end of my second week. I'd stayed late to reorganize the library, this vast room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound books that looked like they'd never even been opened. I was on a rolling ladder, reaching for a high shelf, when I heard the elevator slide open. I froze. He wasn't supposed to be home for hours. Heavy, confident footsteps echoed on the marble, and then he was there, standing in the doorway. Julian Carter in the flesh. He was taller than I'd imagined, with a presence that just sucked all the air out of the room. He was in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair a little messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, but it was his eyes that got me. They were a deep, stormy gray, intelligent and completely devoid of warmth. He looked at me up on that ladder not as a person, but as an unexpected obstacle. "What are you doing?" His voice was deep, smooth, and laced with impatience. Not cruel, just dismissive. I almost dropped the book. My heart hammered against my ribs. All my practiced speeches just vanished. I was just finishing up, sir, I stammered, my voice sounding tiny in the huge room. He didn't answer. His gaze swept over the room, then landed back on me. It felt like being pinned under a microscope. "Mrs. Davenport has your schedule." It does not include late nights. I know. I just wanted to make sure everything was perfect, I said, finding a sliver of my old defiance. I met his gaze, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. That the little mouse on the ladder dared to look back. Perfection is the baseline expectation, not an extracurricular activity, he said coolly. Do not stay late again. He turned and walked away without another word. I stayed on that ladder for a full 5 minutes, my body trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. He hadn't recognized me. Of course he didn't. To him, I was just another face, as insignificant as the hundreds of other people his empire had displaced. The whole thing left me feeling smaller than ever, but it also hardened my resolve. He was just as arrogant, just as unfeeling as I'd imagined. And that made him a target I wouldn't feel a shred of guilt for taking down. From then on, my little acts of rebellion got more personal. I learned he liked his coffee at a precise temperature, so I'd make it a few degrees too cool. He had a collection of antique fountain pens on his desk, arranged in a perfect line. Every day, I'd shift one of them a single millimeter to the left. It was petty, maybe even childish, but it was all I had. It was my silent scream in his silent world, a tiny disruption in the perfect, ordered life of the man who had shattered mine. I was a ghost, sure, but I was learning how to haunt him. Weeks bled into a month. The rhythm of my days was monotonous, clean, small acts of defiance, go home, plot. Julian Carter was still this distant, formidable figure. Our interactions were short and to the point, always started by him, always ending with me feeling like a piece of furniture that had momentarily gotten in his way. But then, one rainy Tuesday evening, something shifted. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the already gleaming countertops before I left, when he came in. It was early for him, not even 7 p.m. He had loosened his tie, and there were faint shadows under his eyes that even his money couldn't erase. He looked tired. Human. He walked over to the state-of-the-art coffee machine, this monstrous chrome beast, and scowled at it like it had personally offended him. He pressed a few buttons, and the machine whirred, then sputtered, and died with a sad little beep. He let out a low, frustrated sigh and ran a hand through his hair. The gesture was so unguarded that I just found myself staring. This wasn't the untouchable titan from the magazines. This was a man defeated by a coffee machine. Before I could stop myself, the words just tumbled out. The pressure sensor is probably clogged. You have to reset it from the back. He turned, his gray eyes locking onto mine. I expected him to snap at me for speaking out of turn. Instead, he just looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his expression. And how would you know that? My family owned a café, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I know my way around a coffee machine. It was a dangerous piece of information to give him, a breadcrumb leading right back to a life he'd destroyed. But in that moment, the old me, the proud café owner, had spoken up. He didn't press. He simply nodded at the machine. Fix it. It was an order, but it didn't have its usual sharp edge. I hesitated for a second, then moved past him. The scent of sandalwood and rain-soaked wool filled the small space between us. My hands worked on instinct, finding the little panel on the back, resetting the valve, and running a quick cleaning cycle. The machine hummed back to life. You have to use finely ground beans, not extra fine, I explained, my voice steady. Otherwise, it clogs the filter. I filled the hopper with the right beans and pressed the button for an espresso. A stream of rich, dark liquid filled the cup, its aroma a ghost of my former life. I placed the cup on the counter without looking at him. There, I said, trying to sound more professional than I felt. I turned to leave, my job done, my invisibility cloak back on. Wait. His voice stopped me at the door. I turned back slowly. He was holding the small cup, swirling the contents, his gaze thoughtful. Thank you, he said. The words were quiet, almost hesitant, like they were foreign to him. I just nodded, unable to speak, and quickly left before he could see the total confusion on my face. It was just 2 words. A simple courtesy. But from him, it felt like an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of the hatred I had so carefully built. Monsters don't say thank you. That little crack in his armor started to widen in the days that followed. It was like by fixing his coffee machine, I had accidentally fixed something between us, changing my status from invisible object to useful object. He started acknowledging me with a curt nod in the mornings. Once, he even asked my name. "It's Clara," I'd said, my heart pounding. "Clara," he repeated, as if tasting the name. And then he just walked away, leaving me to wonder what that meant. The real turning point came during a violent thunderstorm a week later. I was finishing up, the sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows a dramatic canvas of bruised purple and angry flashes of lightning. Just as I was about to leave, the lights flickered and died, plunging the penthouse into a creepy darkness, lit only by the strobing lightning. The dim emergency lights on the floor flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. Then I heard it. A sharp, ragged gasp from the direction of his study. It was the sound of pure, raw fear. My first instinct was to just leave. Let the great Julian Carter be afraid of the dark. It would be a small, fitting justice. But the sound came again, more of a choked gasp this time, and against my better judgment, I found myself walking toward his study. The door was ajar. I pushed it open and found him standing by the window, his back to me. He was ramrod straight, his hands clenched into fists, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Mr. Carter?" I asked softly. He flinched and turned around so fast I took a step back. In a flash of lightning that lit up the room, I saw his face. It was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed almost childlike. The arrogant mask was gone, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability. "The power is out," he stated, his voice tight and strained. "The building's generator should kick in soon," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's just the storm." Another crash of thunder, louder this time, rattled the windows. He flinched again, a tiny tremor running through his powerful frame. And in that moment, I knew. He wasn't just annoyed by the outage. He was terrified. I remembered the emergency candles Mrs. Davenport had shown me in a kitchen drawer. Without thinking, I said, "Stay here. I'll be right back." I navigated the dark apartment by memory, my hands finding the candles and a lighter. When I got back to the study, he hadn't moved. I started lighting the candles, placing them on his desk and the mantelpiece. The small, flickering flames pushed back the oppressive darkness, filling the room with a soft, warm glow. As the light grew, I saw him visibly relax. The tension in his shoulders eased, and the frantic look in his eyes was replaced by a weary exhaustion. He sank into the large leather chair behind his desk, looking not like a billionaire titan, but like a man who had just survived an ordeal. "I don't like small, dark spaces," he said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on a candle flame. It wasn't an explanation. It was a confession. I just stood there, unsure of what to do or say. The man who destroyed my life was afraid of the dark. The man who wielded power like a weapon was, right then, completely powerless. My meticulously crafted image of him as a one-dimensional monster was crumbling, being replaced by something far more complicated and confusing. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a strange, unwelcome pang of something that felt dangerously like empathy. The main power flickered back on a few minutes later, the bright, artificial lights chasing away the intimate candlelit atmosphere. He blinked, like he was waking up from a trance. The mask of cool indifference slid back into place, but it didn't quite fit as well as it did before. He stood up, straightening his suit jacket. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice back to its usual formal tone. "You may go." I left without a word, my mind reeling. That night, I didn't plot my revenge. I lay awake, replaying the image of his face in the lightning flash, the raw fear in his eyes. For the first time, I wondered about the man behind the name. What happened to him to make him so afraid of the dark? The ghost in his machine had just seen a ghost of his own, and it changed everything. The storm completely changed things between us. The invisible wall had been breached, and a fragile, unspoken truce settled in its place. He was still my boss, and I was still his maid, but the air was now charged with a new kind of tension. It wasn't just about our different roles anymore, it was an awareness. I was no longer just a pair of hands that cleaned his home, I was the person who had seen him vulnerable. And he started looking at me differently, his stormy gray eyes lingering on me for a second too long, a question hanging in their depths. My mission for revenge felt murky and confused. How can you plot the downfall of a man when you've seen the scared child hiding inside him? My hatred, once a clear, burning fire, was now a confusing swirl of smoke. I still resented him for what he'd done, but the anger was now tangled up with curiosity and a dangerous, fluttering warmth in my chest whenever he was near. We started to talk. Not about anything important. He'd ask what I thought of a new book he'd bought for the library. I'd recommend a different blend of coffee beans. One afternoon, he found me staring out the window at the park below and just stood beside me, in a comfortable silence, for a full minute before moving on. These small moments were like tiny threads, weaving a connection between us that I felt powerless to stop. The inevitable explosion came on a Friday. I showed up and found the penthouse in a state of chaos, which was a first. Cushions were thrown on the floor, a glass was shattered in the fireplace, and the air was thick with the smell of stale whiskey. Julian was in his office, still in yesterday's wrinkled clothes, staring at a stack of papers with a look of murderous rage. "Clean it up," he snarled as I walked in, not even looking at me. His voice was rough, like scraping stones. I started my work in silence, picking up the pieces of his tantrum. My anger, which had been sleeping, began to simmer. This was him. The destructive force. The man who broke things and just expected someone else to clean up his mess. Someone like me. When I finished the main room, I went into his office to empty the trash. He was on the phone, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I don't care what it takes, you handle it. I want him ruined. Not just fired, I want him unable to get a job washing dishes. Do you understand me?" He hung up with a sharp click and threw the phone onto his desk. He finally looked at me, his eyes blazing. "What are you looking at?" he demanded. That was it. The dam of my carefully controlled silence just broke. "I'm looking at a man who thinks he can solve every problem by destroying something," I said, my voice shaking with a month's worth of repressed fury. "A business rival, a neighborhood, a family's café. It's all the same to you, isn't it? Just something to be bulldozed out of your way." He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. He stalked around the desk until he was standing right in front of me, forcing me to crane my neck back to meet his gaze. We were inches apart. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You see a headline and you think you know the whole story. You know nothing about me." "I know what I see." I shot back, emboldened by my own anger. "I see a cold, heartless man who lives in an empty glass box and surrounds himself with things instead of people. You build towers to your own ego and you don't care who gets buried in the foundation." Every word was a punch, and I saw them land. A muscle twitched in his jaw. His stormy eyes darkened. "And what would you know about it? You, who comes in here every day and quietly cleans up my messes. You think that gives you the right to judge me? Someone has to clean up your messes, Julian," I spat his name like a curse. "You just leave wreckage in your wake. Did you ever, for 1 second, think about the people who lost everything when you built this place? The lives you ruined for this monument to yourself?" Tears of rage pricked my eyes, and I hated myself for them. I would not cry in front of him. He stared down at me, his chest rising and falling with his ragged breaths. The air between us was electric, vibrating with our shared anger. I expected him to fire me. To yell. To throw me out. Instead, he did something that completely unraveled me. His expression softened, the hard lines around his eyes easing. The fire in his gaze was replaced by something else, something raw and intense that I couldn't name. Yes, he whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse. I did. I thought of them. I thought of you. And then his hand came up, his fingers gently brushing a stray tear from my cheek. His touch was like a brand, searing my skin. My breath hitched. The anger, the arguments, the entire world outside this single moment just dissolved into nothing. There was only the scent of him, the heat from his body, and the overwhelming intensity in his eyes. He lowered his head, his gaze dropping to my lips. My own eyes fluttered shut. This was wrong. This was the enemy. This was the man I swore to destroy. But my body betrayed me, leaning into his touch, craving the impossible. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it. He was going to kiss me. The sharp, shrill ring of the penthouse's private line cut through the tension like a knife. We both jumped back like we'd been electrocuted. The spell was broken. He stared at me for a second longer, his face a mask of confusion and shock, before turning to answer the phone that would not stop ringing. I didn't wait. I turned and fled. I ran out of the office, out of the penthouse, and into the elevator, my hand pressed against my mouth where his lips should have been. My whole body was trembling. The mission was compromised. My revenge was forgotten. The man I hated, the arrogant billionaire who destroyed my life, had almost kissed me. And the most terrifying part? I had wanted him to. I didn't go to work the next day. I couldn't. I called in sick, my voice sounding weak and shaky, and spent the day pacing my tiny apartment like a caged animal. My mind was a battlefield. One side screamed at me for my weakness, for betraying my family and my own search for justice. The other, a quieter but more insistent voice, just replayed the look in Julian's eyes, the feel of his touch, the confession that he had thought of me. My plan for revenge seemed like some distant, naive dream. The lines I had drawn in the sand were completely gone. I hated him. I was drawn to him. He was a monster. He was a man with his own ghosts. Both things couldn't be true, yet both felt undeniable. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I had to know the truth. Not the headlines, not my own assumptions, but the real story. My revenge, if it was going to happen at all, couldn't be based on a lie. That night, armed with a new, desperate resolve, I used the emergency key Mrs. Davenport had given me and let myself back into the penthouse. It was late, and I prayed he was out. The apartment was dark and silent. I went straight to his office, the scene of our near kiss, and turned on his computer. I'd seen him type his password a dozen times, a simple sequence I'd memorized without even trying. His mother's birthday. The detail was so human it almost made me stop. But I pushed on. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching his private server for files on the downtown renewal project. I found them buried deep, in a folder encrypted with a level of security that told me I was in the right place. It took me almost an hour, but I used a few tricks from a college computer science class to bypass it. And then, I found it. It wasn't just one file, but dozens. Memos, emails, internal reports, audio recordings of board meetings. I started reading, and the story that unfolded was not the one I knew. Julian's initial plan had been different. He'd wanted a phased redevelopment, offering to buy out local businesses at a generous price, even offering to relocate us to new retail spaces on the ground floor of his tower. He had argued for preserving the character of the neighborhood. But the board, led by a ruthless vice president named James Moore, had pushed back. Moore argued it was too slow, too expensive. He wanted a hostile takeover. The emails showed a bitter fight between Julian and Moore. Julian had argued, passionately at times, for the people. Moore had argued for the bottom line. Then I found the key. A recorded call. It was Moore, talking to someone on the board, outlining a plan to deliberately sabotage Julian's more humane approach. "Let Carter play the good guy," Moore's voice sneered from the speakers. "We'll rush the demolitions through a subsidiary. The press will blame him, his reputation will take a hit, and we'll get what we want. He's too soft for this business anyway." The subsidiary's name was one I recognized from the demolition orders. It all clicked. The brutal, swift destruction of my café, it wasn't Julian's order. It was a corporate coup orchestrated by his rival to undermine him. Julian wasn't the monster who swung the wrecking ball. He was just the man who had taken the blame. He'd lost control of his own project, and the fallout had cost me everything. I sat back in his chair, the monitor's glow on my stunned face. My hatred had been my fuel for months, and now, it was just gone, replaced by a profound, hollow ache. I had been aiming all my rage at the wrong man. Just as I was copying the most damning files onto a flash drive, I heard the elevator door slide open. My blood ran cold. Julian stepped into the office, stopping dead when he saw me in his chair. For a long moment, he just stared, his face unreadable. Then his eyes flickered to the screen, to the open files. The color drained from his face. "Clara," he said, his voice a low whisper. "What have you done?" This was it. The moment of truth. The old me would have taken the flash drive and disappeared, leaked it to the press and watched his company burn, taking more with it. It was the revenge I had dreamed of. But I wasn't that person anymore. I pulled the flash drive from the port and held it in my palm. "I know," I said, my voice steady. "I know about James Moore. I know what he did." He closed his eyes, a weary sigh escaping him. He looked utterly defeated. "So now you have your weapon. You can ruin me. It's what you wanted, isn't it?" "It was," I admitted. "I came here to destroy you, Julian. For what I thought you did to my family." I stood up and walked around the desk until I was standing in front of him, just like the day before. But this time, the air wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with a fragile, painful honesty. "I was wrong," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You're not the monster I thought you were." I held out the flash drive to him. "This is your choice. You can use this to expose more and take back control of your company. Or, you can do nothing." He stared at the small piece of plastic in my hand as if it were a bomb. He looked from the drive to my face, his stormy eyes searching mine for any hint of a trick. He didn't find one. Slowly, he reached out and took it, his fingers brushing against mine. He didn't look away. "Why?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Why are you giving me this? After everything?" "Because," I said softly, "I'm tired of destroying things. I think I'd rather build something for a change." The last of his composure finally broke. He stepped forward, closing the small distance between us. He cradled my face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking my cheeks. His gaze was so intense, so full of gratitude and a depth of feeling that it stole my breath. "Clara," he whispered, my name a prayer on his lips. And this time, there was no phone to interrupt. This time, when he lowered his head and his lips finally met mine, it wasn't an almost kiss. It was a promise. It was the start of something new, born from the ashes of what we had both lost. It was raw, and desperate, and more real than anything I had ever felt. In the heart of that sterile glass tower, surrounded by the ghosts of our past, we chose to build a future. The next week, the business world was rocked by a scandal. James Moore and his allies were unceremoniously fired from Carter Industries. The story of their corporate sabotage leaked to the right people with undeniable proof. Julian, his name cleared, consolidated his control over the company. He emerged more powerful, but different. changed. He didn't fire me. Instead, he asked me to stay. Not as his maid, but as his partner. He came to my parents' small apartment, not as a billionaire, but as a man asking for forgiveness. He explained everything, and while the pain of what they'd lost will never fully go away, they saw the man I had seen. A man trying to right a terrible wrong. Julian didn't just offer me money to rebuild. He offered me a partnership. We spent weeks poring over blueprints and design plans. He listened to my ideas, to my stories about my grandfather, to the heart and soul of what made the original café so special. 6 months later, on the ground floor of the Carter Tower, a new café opened its doors. It's called The Daily Grind, Rebuilt. It's beautiful, brighter, bigger, but with the same heart. It has a bay window for students to study in, a cozy corner for people to share secrets, and that rich, comforting smell of freshly ground coffee. My parents were behind the counter on opening day, their smiles wider and brighter than I had seen in a year. I didn't take my old job back. I have a new one. Julian and I built something together, not just out of brick and mortar, but out of forgiveness, trust, and a love that was forged in the most unlikely of fires. He's still demanding, and I'm still defiant, but our clashes now are filled with laughter and affection. He never lost his fear of the dark, but now, he has me to hold his hand through the storm. My life was destroyed by an arrogant billionaire. But it was rebuilt by the man who learned that the most valuable thing he could ever own was a heart he hadn't intended to win. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. What was your favorite part of Clara and Julian's story? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.